everybody. Good evening. This is the second meeting of the community experts regarding the community engagement model.
Muy bien, buenas tardes a todos. Esta tarde es la segunda reunión del modelo de participación comunitaria para nuestros expertos comunitarios.
And thank you all for being here this evening, and we're really excited to continue our work together.
Muchísimas gracias a todos por estar presentes esta tarde. Nos emociona muchísimo seguir trabajando junto con vos.
A quick reminder that like the last meeting, today's meeting will be recorded.
Un recordatorio que al igual que nuestra última reunión, la reunión de esta noche será grabada.
And before we get started, I want to introduce to everybody the presenters for tonight representing CARB. So you'll be hearing from Karina Aguilera and Deidre Zull as Community Engagement Capacity Building Work Group members.
Y antes de empezar, nos gustaría presentarles a nuestros colegas de parte de CARB, que son Karina Aguilera y Deidre Zull.
All right, next slide, please.
Próxima diapositiva, por favor.
Great, so we're going to go over the language interpretation function.
Bien, ahora mencionaremos la función de interpretación para idiomas el día de hoy.
So once we start the interpretation function, you should see a little globe appear at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. You're going to click that and you're going to choose the language that you would like to hear. So if you'd like to hear English, please choose English. And if you'd like to choose hear the Spanish interpretation, please choose Spanish.
Y en breve, ahorita que empecemos la función de interpretación, usted verá en vuestra pantalla en la parte inferior un icono de un globo que dice Interpretation, interpretación. Selecciónelo, por favor, y de ahí seleccione su idioma. Puede escuchar el programa, ya sea en español o en inglés.
And an important note for folks listening in the Spanish channel, you're going to want to also click mute original audio so that you're only hearing Mark and Aldo giving the interpretation this evening.
Y para aquellos que deseen escuchar el programa en español, queremos dejarles saber, quiera por favor seleccionar el botón que dice Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Así escuchará la voz de su servidor y nuestro colega intérprete Aldo.
Great. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and launch the interpretation function. And please remember that all participants need to select English or Spanish.
Ahora se prenderá la función. Por favor, recuerde que cada participante tiene que elegir su idioma, ya sea inglés o español. Gracias.
So we can, all right. So I just saw the globe appear at the bottom of my screen. I'm going to go ahead and click English. All right. If anybody has any issues with the interpretation function, please feel free to put a comment in the chat to the host or myself, and we can help you out with any technical issues. Next slide, please. All right, and another little reminder for Zoom before we get started, please mute and rename yourself to your affiliation. So you can see my name as a sample, Julia Cernansky, and your preferred pronouns, and then the organization that you are affiliated with. And as always, if you need help, please use the chat to request assistance. All right, next slide. Okay, so we've got a busy agenda for this evening. We're going to be finishing up the welcome and recap here in the next 5 minutes, and then we're going to talk about the model content. Next, we're going to do some breakout room activities. We're going to have a small breakout room discussions, and we'll be doing that on 4 topics with different CARB staff rotating in who can speak to those topics. We're going to have a break in between, come back, do 2 more of those topics, and then we're going to have each breakout group report back kind of the main themes of their conversation so that everybody can hear what each group was talking about. And we're going to take a break and we're going to discuss the sessions. We'll also have a discussion on stipend, childcare, and food as it relates to support for participation in outreach events. And then also we're going to review the evaluation feedback, and then we'll conclude with some wrap up and next steps. All right, next slide, please. Great, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Karina, and she's going to lead our presentation on contract admin and tasks.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So I'll give a brief recap as it relates to your contracts. And so as you can see here, you've all successfully completed task 1, which was to attend the first virtual community expert meeting. And you all should have already started working on task 2 or completed it, which was providing written comments and a summary on the first draft of the community engagement model over to your contract managers. And if you haven't, if you are able to get that to them by this Friday, that would be great. But of course, if you can't, please just let your contract manager know, and you both can figure out when you would be able to turn that in. And then tonight we'll be working on task 3, which is the second community expert virtual meeting, where you all will discuss your initial comments on the first draft of the community engagement model. And as you can see down here, there's 3 other tasks, but these won't be completed by you all until next year, 2024. But we wanted to put it again on this slide just so you can kind of see what's to come. But between task 3 and task 4, you'll have a little bit of downtime, so you won't have anything that you need to submit right away. And next slide, please. And we also wanted to mention the revised invoice process. So in the email that you all received from your contract managers, they talked a little bit about this, but we have updated our invoicing process. And so moving forward, your contract managers are going to be the ones to complete your invoice. And so they'll complete the invoice for you. So they'll fill it out, and then they'll send it over to you so that you can either approve it, or if there's any edits that need to be made, they could go ahead and do those for you. And then they'll send you the revised version of the invoice for you to approve it. So we just wanted to mention this, and hopefully it's not too confusing. And you no longer will be emailing accounts payable your invoices. It'll all be through your contract managers. So just to reiterate, your contract managers will be the one to write up your invoice, and then they'll send it over to you to approve it via email. So you could just say the word approve, or give them any edits that need to be done in that email. And I know this is a new process, so hopefully it's clear. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then myself or other contract managers will go ahead and answer it. And we'll also have some time after the meeting has concluded. So after 8 p.m., if you still have questions and you can stick around, we could answer them then as well. And I'll go ahead and pass it back to Julia. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Karina. All right, so these are the meeting core principles that we discussed and went through during our last meeting. You'll see highlighted in yellow the ones that were added based on your suggestions. We got really good feedback from the last meeting to remind people to make space and take space, and to assume good intent. So definitely want to uplift those suggestions from you all. And these are the meeting core principles that we will be employing in all of our community expert meetings. All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So on the topic of time, we recognize that 3 hours is both a long time and a short time, and that people are concerned that it might not be enough time. So we wanted to let you all know that CARB staff are willing to stay after the meeting have a phone call to follow up or to discuss any of the topics that we go over tonight offline. We'll also ask if you want to extend our future meetings by 30 minutes in a survey at the end of the meeting. So maybe think about that during tonight's meeting and keep an eye out for that survey where we'll ask you all if you'd like to extend the future meetings by 30 minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to cover a little bit of the model content. Thank you to all the community experts who suggested that we should discuss as a larger group what we want to include or exclude from the model. As a reminder, CARB has a goal of developing a model and training to help staff engage with communities. CARB also wants to collaborate with diverse communities to develop and implement CARB actions and programs. So we'd like to ask you to spend 5 minutes sharing 2 pieces of information. First, what are the top 1 to 3 things you think should be in the model? For example, a section on outreach materials. And second, what are the top 1 to 3 things you think we should avoid having in the model? For example, training that CARB staff should take. Okay, so we're going to use Jamboard to help collect this information. And then also as a little bit of a reminder, if you're in the Spanish channel, you can always view the Spanish presentation by clicking at the top to view options. And then you'll be able to click presentation in Spanish. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to share my screen. So Lisa, if you're able to, oh, great. Perfect, there it is. Thank you. All right, so these are the 2 questions that we have for you. What do you think the model must have? What are the top 1 to 3 things you think the model must have? And what are the top 1 to 3 things you think the model should avoid having? You can feel free to put that in the chat or please use the raise hand function. Jasmine, I see your hand up.
Yes, maybe adding community stories into the module.
Okay, great, thank you. So we can adding community stories into the module. Okay. And Leonora?
So I prepared a list of things to include and exclude, and if I could just go over them. So the first thing I wanted to recommend including is a plan to reframe community engagement from a customer oriented approach to a community oriented approach. I have to give credit for this to the Davenport Institute in their community engagement class, where I learned about the problem, which I think is very real. I've seen this where a lot of people come to community engagement opportunities with that customer approach where they're thinking, okay, what do I like? What makes sense for me? And so I think it's really important, for the, facilitators and for CARB to think about how can that be reframed to be about the community orientation instead of customer orientation. The second thing is incorporation of fair and representative democratic processes. So I wanted to, support the idea of things like statistically valid polling and democratic lotteries that ensure broad and unbiased participation. Lotteries can be particularly effective in creating diverse and representative panels for discussions. And they address the issue of overrepresentation of privileged groups. And similarly, statistically valid polling more accurately reflects communities' views and needs. And then the third thing that I wanted to recommend including is addressing toxic behavior and harassment. So that's a big issue in community engagement. I mean, that's a tough issue, but like I think that needs to be included in the model. And then on the exclude side, I listed one, avoidance of discretionary decision making. So just like anywhere in there where it's like allows staff or facilitators to like choose particular people or choose particular groups. I think that type of discretionary decision should be removed, and things should be systematized and made as fair as possible. And to protect against unfair practices in discretion. I think that also maintains transparency and fairness and prevents perception of bias. I think that it should be excluded. I was gonna give you some, but like the exclusion of diverse perspectives should be excluded. So anything that inadvertently excludes or marginalizes groups, and I think for the model that means moving beyond tokenistic diversity efforts and systematizing fair, inclusive, and diverse practices as much as possible. And then
sorry, Lenora, I'm gonna pop in now, just to keep us rolling on time. Thank you for providing a great example of what that feedback can look like really detailed feedback on what the model should have, and for also really modeling a suggestion with a reasoning of why. So that's really helpful. So we've got a few suggestions here, and I want to start getting everybody oriented with the Jamboard function, and then those folks who have their hands up, and then also Leonora, invite you to put the rest of those. Oh no, not at all, not the wrong time for that at all. Just want to keep us moving, and then get everybody oriented with the Jamboard, and then make sure that we get all of your comments in the Jamboard itself. So this is what the front page of the Jamboard looks like. Next
Julia,
slide, please.
I'm sorry to, are you supposed to be sharing the screen for the Jamboard? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so I thought I was, but I think I jumped ahead a little bit. So I'm just gonna orient folks to the Jamboard. This looks like it's the slide, not the live Jamboard. And then we'll go ahead and get everybody else's comments into this first slide of the Jamboard. So if you have your hand up, please keep it up, because we're going to be going through how to add your comments to the Jamboard. All right. So I've just dropped a link in the chat, and we can go to the next slide, please.
So I'm not sharing slides.
Oh, you're on the Jam. Yeah. Okay. So these are the yeah, sorry, that was my confusion too, Lisa. But it's okay. All right, so this is the Jamboard function that we're going to be using tonight to answer the two questions that you all have been thinking about and already throwing some answers out. Or you can see that there are multiple pages on it, so you can use the forward and backward arrows to get to the correct page. And you're going to have folks to guide you in each of the breakout rooms, so don't fret about that too much. We'll get you on the right page. Next slide, please. And then to add a comment, you're going to be adding a sticky note. So you'll see an example there on the screen. This is my comment. And we're also going to have note takers in the room, so we can definitely utilize those folks to help get your comments into the sticky note form. But you can also click that link and then add your own sticky notes. So some of you may have clicked the link already and if you're on that first page, then you'll be seeing those two questions. And I see a bunch of sticky notes already coming in, so thank you. It looks like you guys are naturals. You've already got this figured out. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's a sample of what it'll look like when you click sticky note, and then you're going to click save to save that sticky note, and then you can move it around on the page, which I also see some of you doing already. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the link. I'm going to drop it in the chat again. If that link isn't working for anybody, please let me know or let us know in the chat and we can help get you oriented. Okay. Next slide. Okay.
So Julia, I think Lisa has to click on the link and share the Jamboard.
Okay, I can do that. Lisa, if you
Okay.
want to keep your presentation up, I've got it. I'm watching your great comments come in. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and we'll take a look at them together. All right. So this is great. We've got a lot of comments already. I can see all of you using the sticky note function. I'm just going to click on a few just for folks. If it looks like something looks small and it gets cut off, you can double click and then you'll see the entire comment. So it looks like we've got comments on things to avoid in the model, pitfalls to avoid, lack of flexibility, lack of accountability, and demonstrating results. So thank you for that. Leonora, I'm going to copy paste the comment that you gave us in the chat and make sure that that gets in there. See community stories, and then we've got two hands up, Lisa and Sierra. I'm going to ask if you are able to, please put your answers to these two questions in a sticky note on the Jamboard page. And Lisa, are you having any issues with that? I'm going to ask you to unmute.
The issue is that you're expecting me to type when I have one bad eye tonight. So yeah.
Oh. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you tell me what your comment is and I'll type it in for you. This is how it'll work in the breakout room too.
Oh,
Happy to
okay.
support.
The previous individual, I really would love to hear the rest of her list because I'm so much in agreement with her. But one of the things that that I wrote down, where is that note? It is about empathy and teaching people how to actively listen, because a lot of meetings I go to with different levels of government and advisory committees and such, they actually don't actively listen and figure how to integrate the concerns of the community into their project. It's almost like we're just doing this to check a box and then we're going to go ahead and do what we're going to do. And that's not what public engagement is about, because I believe that you get a better product when you start to actively listen, have the empathy, have some salesmanship, because a lot of people who show up to perform the duties of community engagement really need some salesmanship skills.
Great, thank you. So I got empathy and teaching of active listening. A lot of the community meetings that you've been in don't have active listening, and that kind of results in a lack of integration of that community feedback into the project itself. All right, thank you so much, Lisa. And thanks for modeling that if you're having any issue with the sticky notes at all, again, we'll have a note taker in each of the breakout rooms, and they'll do exactly what I just did. We'll type up your comments for you and make sure that it gets on those Jamboards. All right, so feel free to keep putting your comments in there. At this point, I'm going to ask Lisa to pop the presentation back on the screen, and we're going to go over a little bit of the model content summary, and then we'll go ahead and move into our breakout rooms. Great. Thank you. All right, so there were quite a few sticky notes in there, so I think it's going to take us a minute, and maybe the CARB staff can help me to go through and read through the sticky notes, and we can come back to a summarization of those first two questions, because you guys are putting a lot of really good suggestions in there. Next slide. Okay, so these are going to be our breakout rooms this evening. We're going to have room 1, which is the main room, and your facilitator will be Jose. We'll have room 2, which will be my room. I'll be your mediator. We'll have room 3, Lisa will be your mediator. And we'll have room 4, and Aldo will be your mediator. And don't worry about self-selecting those rooms. We're going to get those set up and assign folks to rooms. And then we're going to stay in the rooms, the mediator, the note taker, and the community experts, and our excellent CARB content experts will be circling through on 4 different topics. So they're going to be moving. We will be staying put. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So we're going to have a few questions for each breakout group, and there's going to be 4 topics. And the questions will be in the order of importance. You're going to see all of those on the Jamboard. So we can answer one or all of the questions, and then as a group, be prepared to do that report back that I mentioned in the agenda. So feel free to select somebody in your group who feels like kind of condensing what you guys talked about, the main points of conversation, and reporting that back out to all of us once we regroup at the end of the breakout group activity. Next slide. Okay, there's an example again of what the Jamboard will look like. This is for the narrative topic. Next slide. Okay, so at this point, we are going to get those breakout rooms set up. And so bear with us for just a minute while we get those configured. And then once we open the rooms, you should all see a prompt that says join room, but give us just a second to get those set up. Feel free to stretch your legs out, have a little moment for movement. I know Zoom meetings are hard to be seated so long. We're going to get those breakout rooms set up. And Joyce, just let me know when you're ready to go.
I just opened all the rooms.
Oh, great. All right. So you should all see an invitation to join breakout room, and you can go ahead and click accept.
Yeah, and for those that don't have an invitation, you're just staying in the main room.
Think let's see, Espe, Violeta, Alec. I think I'm missing Caro and Maria. Can you see my screen? I'm currently sharing the narrative Jamboard.
Yes, and I do see Caro and Maria are here too.
Sí.
Great. Joyce, I think Reverend Ambrose is in Julia's room. You can assign him to that. He's under Green the Church.
Things that we may have missed. At this point, we're going to do a bit of a report out on each group. And before we do that, just to give you guys time to, maybe look back through the Jamboard slides, we're also going to do a quick report back from the, from the community experts. Okay. So we're going to start with room 1, which was our main room. Is there anyone who feels comfortable doing a report out of room 1? And maybe we can share the slides, the Jamboard slides as well.
And I just want to make sure the interpretation's going. Sorry to interrupt, but before we jump in too much.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And for all of us who maybe have just jumped in from the breakout rooms, you do need to go back and choose English on the interpretation function. Okay, so
Julia, do you want me to share my screen for this Jamboard? Would that be the best?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Let's share the screen just in case folks from room 1 want to point to any specific one of their sticky notes.
I'll just go to slide 1. Well,
Okay.
I don't know. Sorry for scrolling like that, everybody. And oh wow, yeah. Too.
No problem. This is a good opportunity actually, because I'm gonna let the folks from the breakout rooms have a minute to kind of collect your thoughts, and then I'll come back to you to see who wants to share out. We're going to start with room 1. But we didn't get a chance to kind of talk over all of your great comments on the very first slide. Lisa, if we can go back to that.
Sure.
Slide number 1. Yeah, perfect. There are quite a few. I got a little bit of the way through organizing them on our break, but read through, and I think there are some common themes that we can identify in terms of things to avoid in the model. We're definitely seeing a theme here in terms of surveys, like avoid too many surveys, too many questions. We also heard and see a lot of comments about using, plain meaning language, making sure that we're being understandable to the community. So should avoid speaking in acronyms without defining those acronyms or over technical language, over technical processes and proceedings. We also heard a common theme that we heard as well was to avoid kind of discretionary decision making, and that specifically as it relates to opportunities for kind of unconscious bias to affect the community engagement model itself. And also, this one speaks to my heart, not including conflict resolution. So maybe some kind of conflict resolution training. And then also saw some comments that we shouldn't assume that all communities are similar. So really having that kind of cultural competence and community competence for each individual community, and adapting the model for each individual community and engagement effort. And those were some of the things that I noticed as kind of common themes and things to avoid in the model, and also things that I heard you all uplifting in our individual breakout discussions. All right, so I'm going to work a little bit on organizing the things that the model must have. Understandably, there are quite a few of those, and thank you all very much for taking the time to write those down. It's really great to have specific suggestions from you all, so thank you. All right, so I'm gonna ping back to group 1, and pick on you guys and see if you have someone willing to share out. Caro.
Hi everyone. My name's Caro. There's so much to cover. But I guess like some key takeaways from what we discussed in terms of the narrative. I think we discussed adding more historical context of EJ communities. We talked about essentially redlining context, more redlining context. And something that I brought up was a note on timeliness in responding to community concerns and questions. Just because I think we need to be respectful of community members' time, and oftentimes, especially low-income people of color, are forced to wait through long, like 3-hour meetings to give comments, or forced to wait in this political series of circumstances. So I really wanted to emphasize putting a note about that in the narrative as well. A quick summary on implementation, our conversation on implementation. We talked a lot about culturally relevant examples and culturally relevant food, and how that indicates that we're paying attention to who, where we are and what the folks' needs are. In terms of guiding conversation, having the conversation flowing, and making explicit space for sharing our lived experiences, so that we're not extracting or being too extractive, just asking questions, survey style, and more like making space for people to share where they're coming from, I think is really important. And in terms of the closed aspect, we kind of just talked about changing the name, because it kind of sounds like instead of it being cyclical, it's like the end of a conversation. So we want to change the name to something that might indicate that this is a living document, a living structure. And the last thing we spoke on was making more time for folks to speak. It's not limiting them to the 2-3 minutes that sometimes they're given, especially when they made it out to our meeting. So that's kind of like quick takeaways of what we discussed. Anyone from room 1 can also chime in if I've forgotten anything.
Great, thank you, Caro. Yeah, anybody else from room 1? Okay. If not room 1, we're gonna move on to room 2. Those were my folks. I think we had Leonora said she might be comfortable sharing, but if anybody else from room 2 wants to save Leonora from volunteering as tribute to share, please feel free to do so. Okay, Leonora, I think you're going to be our share out.
Okay. I have to confess I didn't take great notes, so I'm so sorry if I'm gonna miss some points here. But we had an in-depth discussion about the word narrative, and that's there was maybe a lack of clarity about what that's intending to mean. That's not very accessible language, so the word narrative. And we discussed redlining, the lack of redlining in the narrative, and especially in West Fresno. I believe we discussed that. And just trying to recall everything. And I think those were the main things that we discussed. Apologies if I'm missing things.
No, not at all. You guys, we really covered a wide range of topics. All right, I'm gonna invite also Lisa, if you'd like to speak to some of the topics that you brought up, and also let's see if Lisa's here.
Are you talking to me?
I think yes. Do you want to share out some of the additional topics that we covered in our room?
In the narrative part, I talked about basically a little bit more language regarding urban tribal communities. And we also talked about the length of the document, and I made some suggestions along that way. I wasn't taking copious notes. I am sorry. I'm better at this type of stuff. Let's see, what else did we talk about? Oh, and we also definitely talked about the redlining situation in Fresno, where they have a historical pattern of redlining and how that carries over to some of the environmental decisions of the city to this day that are impacting a well-entrenched African-American community here in Fresno.
Great, thanks, Lisa and Lenora. And I remember one of the other things we talked about, Anita, I'm just going to uplift. Anita brought up a lot of really good comments about kind of reframing the language in the model itself so that it was more of like saying what it actually is. So instead of narrative, you know, saying that this is a, you know, background information. And Anita, feel free to jump in if you want to expand on that. Just wanted to make sure to uplift those comments as well. All right, so go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, that's on track and actually throughout the document, same comment, but thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's move on to room 3. Love to hear what you guys talked about.
So I'm gonna, open it up to anyone. I know we didn't really talk about this report back, so sorry if I didn't give anyone warning on that. So happy for anyone, just their impressions of our discussion, or, you know, thoughts and some things you remembered. Thanks, Heather.
So some of the really interesting things that we talked about is not only reviewing what, like when we were reviewing some of the past things that CARB has done, not breaking it down to what, like, I guess some of the outcomes of the projects that have done, not only talking about where they thrive, but also where they made mistakes and how they could improve, or what they have done to improve. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, you know, every agency, government agency, down to CBOs or whatever, we are all governed by humans who are imperfect. So it's good to show the community that we have this self-awareness at even at a higher level, not just within our cities and stuff, but, you know, government agencies or state agencies, things like that. And I think it really helps, I guess, humanize it and make it more obtainable for everyone. That's what I can remember.
Thanks, Heather. I don't know if anyone else in our room wants to share.
Okay, all right, so let's go to our last group, room 4.
Big Boss, you taking it? You want me to take it?
Go ahead and start. I'll take the next one, if you don't mind. Well, you know, since I'm talking to me, I got it.
Thanks, Elda.
One of the questions that stood out to us, or to me, that our group made, this was regarding the history, having a in the narrative to include history originally, how California was originally part of Mexico, and in the history of Mexican Americans in California. So our group made a suggestion that we should include that in the narrative. What else we had? It was principles to They include community, self-determination, honesty, dignity and consideration, integrity and services. Those were two of the comments that we had. Those are the two that stood out to me. Deidre, did anything else stand out from our group?
Yeah, one of the things we maybe haven't heard yet that seemed like we had a lot of agreement on in the group that was really interesting was talking about kind of much more authentic and longer term relationship building in terms of, not parachuting into places and holding one meeting and then leaving, but what are the ways to have kind of liaisons that you recognize the people showing up at meetings, that they're going to community events, that they're at food drives, that they're really more embedded in the community than just holding, a 2-hour meeting every 6 months or something. So what are the ways that CARB can, maybe more long-term think about fostering those kind of more authentic and present relationships? And yeah, I think anybody from our group, if we missed anything, please feel free to jump in or correct what we've said.
Right. Anybody else from any of the rooms did you think of something that you talked about in your room that was really interesting that you would like to share out?
Well, I'll just chime in too, because one thing that I really, that struck me as kind of a great idea and interesting was just having some sort of celebration or acknowledging community members that have participated, and it helps build relationships, and just acknowledging them and these communities for all the time and effort and input they give to us as a state agency year after year. So I don't know, that's an interesting idea to explore. I'm always up for a celebration, as my friends here know. So I'd love to celebrate with people who've participated in our efforts.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. That's a wonderful share out to kind of conclude on. And I know that in our group in room 2, we also got some really good feedback on kind of alternatives to the certificate of participation that might be kind of a more meaningful, recognition of folks taking the time to participate in these processes. All right, so let's see, I have a comment in the chat here. Yes, Jasmine, thank you. In our group, Jasmine put in the chat, that part won't sit well with everyone in the communities. Taking action and getting things done should be the award. That was definitely kind of the focus in our group, that instead of a certificate, action, results, and solutions are really the best way to show appreciation for the community. And I see some agreement there in the chat. So just to kind of summarize some of the share outs that we've gotten from the group, we're definitely hearing a few themes, all of the breakout groups. More historical context, especially with respect to redlining. And we have I think it was group 3, advocating for inclusion of the formation of California and more inclusion of Mexican American history. I also heard over all of the groups that it's really important for agencies and organizations to be timely and responsive in the community engagement process, and especially with BIPOC communities and underrepresented communities. And from our group, more recognition and language providing guidance around tribal community engagement. We also heard a lot of comments and suggestions around really building cultural competency and cultural considerations when it comes to community engagement. So not every community is the same, and there needs to be a level of competency and consideration of that. And then also heard across the groups that it's really important to make space for lived experience, and to not extract that information, but to make space for folks to share it. And that was something that we heard in our group too. I think Anita suggested community engagement should be like 70% listening and 30% education. So it's a common theme there that we heard. And then we also heard across the groups kind of in terms of the document as a whole, its construction, just kind of making the language a little bit more plain language, shortening it, making it more accessible, and kind of some of the language a little bit more common sense. And then overall, again, making more time for folks to speak. And then the final thing I'll share out is, I think there were a lot of comments that related to kind of like how to build more authentic and long-term relationships through community engagement. So not just popping in every 6 months, like Deidre said. And our group and some other groups really pointed to transparency and solutions as a way to do that. So really acknowledging mistakes, humanizing the process, and also providing solutions. So thank you all so much for sharing out and for the work that you did in those breakout groups. I really look forward to reading through all of your sticky notes. So thank you so much for sharing that. At this point, we're going to take a quick break. Let me just check when we'll come back. So it looks like we'll be coming back at 7:15. So feel free to turn your cameras off, stretch your legs, grab some water. We will be back at 7:15 and we'll continue with our agenda then. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you all got a chance to stretch your legs, grab some water. All right, so we're gonna get the slides up here in just a second. Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. All right, and at this point, we're gonna continue with our agenda. And we're going to start on the topic of the community dialogue sessions. I'm going to hand it over to Deidre.
Thanks, Julia. Thank you all. I know it's a long night and it's getting late. So we really quickly wanted to take a few minutes to discuss the dialogues, which is what we're calling the upcoming public community meetings that we're having. So just as a reminder, we're doing those to kind of gather feedback and recommendations from the wider public on the model, and the audience for that is communities across California, with an emphasis on priority communities or people that are impacted communities. So next slide, so slide 42. We wanted to just reflect back some of what we heard in our last meeting and some of the feedback that we've gotten for people that have submitted the model, and just to let you know what we've heard and how we've changed both the public meetings that will be coming up, those dialogue sessions, and then feedback that we're putting into the model more broadly. So we definitely heard from you all that the San Joaquin Valley is too large for one meeting. So as you all know, we had you vote and then selected the 2 locations that had the highest votes for the San Joaquin Valley. So we added a meeting. So we'll be in Fresno and Bakersfield. We also heard that people want to be able to participate in helping CARB figure out where to go to have these meetings. So we tried to do that through the voting process and the polls that we took last time. We did need to send out a poll to get a revote on the Bay Area and LA because the first results were just sort of too close for us to call. So those came in, and we'll be going to Oakland and East LA. East LA might be a little challenging right now with the 10, but our goal is still to meet there. We also heard that we need to think about kind of venue accessibility. So we're trying to go for venues that are equidistant from lots of locations. And we heard from folks that the internet online meeting options are great, but that a lot of people don't have internet access. And so we just want to reiterate that there are call-in options for those meetings, and there'll be translation and that stuff. So we know that that's not perfect, but we just want to make sure that you all know we heard what you said and we tried to incorporate it into the upcoming meetings. And then we also wanted to take that feedback and make sure it gets reflected in the model. And so we heard some kind of big themes around issues of accessibility. So making sure that we're thinking about weather, driving time, carpooling, transit access, internet access, that we're thinking about inclusion. So who is left out or included and where these meetings are held. So especially thinking about rural areas, unincorporated areas, tribes, people that don't have internet access. And also thinking about people that may have challenges around, I just switched to Spanish. Let me switch to English really quickly. People that may have challenges around documentation. So considering places that are accessible for people and won't put them in challenging situations. And we also heard we need to be transparent on how locations are selected. So thinking about, is CARB required to go somewhere legally? If not, how are we making decisions? We heard using data is a good idea, but being very aware that data can be wrong, especially in rural locations. The data may be old or inaccurate. And we heard that there needs to be this balance between sort of high populations and rural locations. So all of that is, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna pop in. Looks like we lost the English slides. I don't see, oh, those are back up. Great. So if anybody's on Spanish slides, you can click view options and click Lisa's screen to see those. And also, Lisa, I see your hand up. We're gonna have a portion for questions and a little bit of discussion at the end of Deidre's presentation, so I'll make sure to get back to you then. Thanks, Deidre. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no worries. Make sure everybody's good. So we just wanted to reflect, what we've heard, where it's getting incorporated for the upcoming public meetings and where it's getting incorporated into the model more broadly. And if you can go to the next slide, which is slide 43. So this is where we're going. It starts soon. We're starting at the end of the month with an online meeting. Then we'll be in Yuba City, Salinas, Oakland, East LA, San Bernardino, Brawley, Fresno, Bakersfield, and then we'll end with an online meeting in late January. The venues that are on there are mostly secured. We're still getting a couple of TBDs, but we tried to find places that were accessible, that were known to the community, and that were, free parking, accessible to transit, safe, all of that kind of good stuff. Okay, so next slide, slide 44, I think. Yeah. We also wanted to share a draft agenda and ask if you all had feedback on this. This is optional. You don't have to give feedback. You can do so in this meeting. We've also shared a Google Doc that has a link. You're more than welcome to put feedback there, or you can follow up with feedback to us afterwards via email or other ways to reach us. And so if you go to the next slide, just slide 45, the draft agenda. So, it was great to hear people talking tonight about having meetings that are too long, and we're planning on something around 2 hours. We'd like to welcome and introduce people, give a quick overview of what the document is, why we're doing it, and what the public meetings are for. And then we would spend about an hour in breakout groups. So semi-similar tonight, but at a level where we don't expect people to have read a 100-page document. But we would ask kind of general questions about how can CARB best share information or communicate? How can we partner or work with you? And then really, we've heard a lot tonight about that follow through. So how can we best show that we've listened and taken your feedback into account? And there would be a break somewhere in there. We would do sort of a similar report back and then have a wrap up. And in that wrap up session, we would share other ways that people can provide feedback. Karina will run through some of these, but they can do it online, they can send emails. We have a voicemail set up that people can call into. They can attend other meetings. So we want to make sure that there's kind of a variety of options for people to provide feedback if they do or don't show up to these meetings. And then what we'll be doing with that feedback, how we'll hold ourselves accountable, and how we'll be transparent with that information. So I just want to pause there and see if there's any kind of major reactions to the agenda, changes that you all would recommend, things that we haven't included that we should.
Thanks, Deidre. Lisa, saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was really excited when I first saw Fresno, and then when I saw the date, the first thing in my mind was fog. We're having the major rains starting to come in, and when they leave, I would just be very careful about the fog when you're coming into the valley from, Stockton on all the way down to Bakersfield, because, the weatherman is actually saying it's going to be probably really bad this year because of Tule Lake and all the water that's already in the valley. And I had thought, why are you guys doing these meetings in January and not in March to give some leeway for the fog to leave?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That really speaks to some of your feedback from the breakout rooms as well, of that kind of local knowledge and how that can be helpful in terms of planning for these. So maybe we can connect with your contract manager and have kind of further discussions offline about how to be respectful and safe and communicate with the community about that fog issue, what we can do.
Then the other thing also too is, since you're having it at Van Pau Elementary, will you be sending notices with the children home? Because that is one of the things that typically I've seen a lot of agencies not do is that you're having this meeting in an elementary school and none of the parents know. And that's a really good way to get feedback from, you know, people with kids in communities of interest in Vang Pao is definitely in a BIPOC community.
That's great, Lisa. We hadn't thought about that, but someone actually just brought that to our attention maybe 2 days ago, that we should work with coordinating with superintendents at the various school districts.
Oh, yeah, because even like a half sheet of paper being sent home with each child would go so far, so far.
Yeah, we love that. Thank you. That's great feedback. Any other thoughts on the agenda?
And can we go to the next slide? Yeah, let's go to the next slide. I think there are some specific questions there that you guys had for folks. Yeah. Any responses to these, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Is there a different way to organize the meetings, different questions for the breakout groups, other things that should be discussed? Okay, I think if there's no other comments there, we can go to the next slide. I see some comments coming in the chat. Thanks, Lenora and Jasmine. All right, and Deidre?
Yeah, so this really builds off what Lisa was just saying. You know, our outreach right now, our team's been working pretty hard. We've put together a video, we have flyers for each location. We're sending out emails. You all may have seen them. We're doing posts on social media. And, you know, to reiterate, we've heard we should probably speak with superintendents and local communities. But are there other ways we should be trying to reach out? And are there ideas, you know, like school districts on who we should also be reaching out to besides our normal list?
Great. See a comment in the chat from Jasmine. Yes, and flyers in city halls. We also had a question in the chat. Will you be providing nourishment for the attendees?
We are going to let Heather answer that. It's the next question we knew was going to come up.
Great. All right, so we'll hold that question and talk about it in our next agenda item. Any other questions or comments about this outreach component? Great, we have another comment in the chat from SBAY, community college contacts and university contacts for outreach. From Jasmine, signs to welcome the guest or directions where to go. And then from Caro, placing flyers in libraries and talking to libraries. Great, thank you for those suggestions. All right.
That's super helpful.
Great, I see some upvoting on that too. Okay, so we're going to hand it over to Heather for our next agenda item and move on to the next slide. We'll be discussing stipends, childcare, and food.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for sharing your time with us and providing us all the great leadership advice that you have provided. It's been really enlightening to continue to hear from you all this evening. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Arias, part of the management team here at CARB. And I have the honor to support this team who's supporting you and providing hopefully what we are envisioning to be a very radically changing and helpful tool for our staff CARB-wide in their efforts in doing much better with communities. Because I'll be the first to admit that I've been working in the community air protection and freight for many years, and we have a long way to go and a lot of work to do to get better at seeking advice from our communities and getting the input. The team did share with me that as part of the discussion last time, there was various questions about stipends and childcare and food. So to make sure that we're honoring our commitment to follow up with you all on questions, I'm here tonight to share with you why we currently are not offering this in most cases, and where we are offering it, you know, what it is and what we are. It all really boils down to what we have authority to do, either in broad statute or budgets. So there's a couple different ways. There can be a specific bill that's written similar to what was done for the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee that talked about funding, or there could be some budget language, and in the budget language it could talk about a pot of funds and then talk about what we're allowed to spend it on, which is what was used in order to help with the consultation group for the Community Air Protection Program. Outside of those two groups that support very specific work in CARB, but this time we're not aware of any broad statute or budgetary authority that allows us, CARB as a whole, to provide stipends to our community experts, to provide any funding for childcare, to provide any funding for food, to provide any funding for transportation. All great advice that you guys have been giving us, and bluntly, we know you've been telling us this for years. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's very frustrating for me in that we have not been able to follow up with this great advice. And we have heard it over and over and over again. I'm glad that you're continuing to reiterate it. I'm glad that you are sharing with this team how important that is. I can tell you that we are continuing to try and reach out to all of the different organizations that we've heard are doing various community work within the state, and trying to see if they're aware of any broad statute that we can look at and point to be able to incorporate these very important components to ensure adequate support for community members that take their time to share their expertise and their advice with us. So I have asked the team to make sure that as part of this process, we continue to document the advice that you're giving us in these areas. But I also wanted to make sure that we were clear. Okay, that's a great question in the chat. We have done that in the past, where we have provided funding and then very promptly got in trouble for doing it. So we've gotten in trouble if we have provided funding to other organizations that have then provided food. You may have been at various functions where there's been food. Sometimes CARB staff are paying for it out of their own pockets, which I can appreciate, but on the flip side, I also do not want that to become a mandate and then become something that CARB staff are using as a reason why they can't do proper community engagement. So what we're trying to do is acknowledge the concern that's been raised. We're trying to make sure that we elevate it, highlight it, lift it up in this work and in our discussions with our board members and our bosses. We will look to see if there's ways to seek the ability through statutory or budget language changes, but to be clear, we don't get to make those decisions. That's the governor's office. They get to make those decisions. So we certainly encourage you all to make your recommendations also clear to the governor's office, as well as any of your elected officials. That being said, I also have heard you over the years that we're not asking you to carry the water on this. We are asking you to support us in this. Because I do hear you and I completely understand the challenge there, but right now we have legal constraints that we can't get around. So I see Lisa's hand up. Is it okay, Julia, for Lisa to go?
Absolutely. We'll have about 5 minutes here for questions and comments. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I used to work for Caltrans and we used to provide, what was it, an igloo of Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
Danish cookies, we love those friggin' things. Danish cookies, $1.99, and coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up buying a coffee urn, and when I left, I took my urn with me because I had other things to do, but we figured out a way how to do it. And I'm not going to really say how to do it because this is being recorded. And as such, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but there are some creative methods. I know in Fresno, if you work with Mr. Arias or any other of the city council, they have funding where they may be able to do, at least put out, some igloo of, Kool-Aid and some cookies, or, just a little something, because I will tell you, even if you provide a simple igloo of, Kool-Aid, which is like $4 and water in a cup, those little niceties go a long way with communities. And also too, when you're dealing with an angry person, you can say, hey, let's get you a cup of coffee and sit down and talk about this. And that gives you time to decompress the anger. But yeah, I think there is a way. It's just you have to be very creative about it.
I would say, yes, there's been ways we've been creative, Lisa, and we've gotten into a whole lot of trouble. So we are, I mean, honestly,
and I totally understand, taking
I
money
wish
from
we could. And
workers, because I used to be a union president and I would have a problem with that too.
Yeah. But that to be said, we certainly understand the importance of it, and hear all the other community members that have talked about this, all the other community experts, all the various community advocate groups that have brought this up. I want to acknowledge that we hear you, and that we are trying pretty hard to figure out if we can get some changes to be able to use some of the funding that we have, because we agree this is critical in order to meet the mission, right? Our mission is to support you as community members and to get that input, that advice, that data, and all of that is required. But right now, we continue to hit brick walls on it. Some of the questions in the comments, agreed that we've talked about this too. We're talking about like water and stuff like that, but we're also talking about if this goes the way we hope, and when I say we hope, I'm talking about the CARB staff that are on this meeting. We're envisioning this to really be, it's going to take a while for it to work, but we really want to see a fundamental change at CARB, right? And we want to see a fundamental way in which CARB does business. And that means everything that we do would incorporate some form of, community engagement. And a lot of that has to do with, what questions need to be answered and how the communities want to be involved and all that kind of stuff. So in order to do that correctly and be able to provide the things like childcare you're talking about, and transportation and food and all the things that you have rightfully and properly, and all the things you've been giving us the advice on, we've got to figure out a way to fund it and support it. We're trying to figure out if there's some way to build some partnership with other agencies that are also interested in it. But just know we hear you. And I'm sorry if it seems like we're just ignoring that and not doing anything about it. But we are.
I just look at, you know,
trying.
I just look at Kool-Aid's gonna run you $6. 50
Mhm.
count of cups is like $3 at Smart and Final. You
Right.
borrow an Igloo from, you know, you come to Fresno, borrow Caltrans stuff because they have a setup. You know, so you're looking at a cost of maybe less than $15 to provide at least something to drink.
No, I don't disagree with you, Lisa. I'm
Yeah,
talking
but-
about the magnitude of it.
Oh yeah, the
and every
magnitude of doing the
program
entire
across-
state is big.
Right, and we're talking about all of our programs and stuff like that. I agree. I mean, over the years, I've been asking, how do the schools do it? How did Caltrans do it? How did SCIG do it? I mean, how are they all doing it, right? And so we've really hounded the lawyers. I mean, the team here can tell you, it's, you know, we were even told before this started that we couldn't contract with community experts, and we were unwilling to take that as an answer. So we're beating the lawyers down, I would say, but we're not there yet on this one. And this one is one that I have been told no since I started on freight transport 10 years ago. Not to say that it's over and not to say that it's done, just we're trying to figure out how to get the right yes. So we're not giving up, but I also didn't want to just ignore your concerns and not address it or share with you, you know, where we're at. Since, like I said, since we made the commitment to make sure that we were being open and honest with you. So all that being said, we will not be able to provide refreshments for these upcoming meetings, which is extremely unfortunate and frustrating. Because we would like to be able to do that along with all the other great advice you've given us, but we'll keep working on it. And we hope that you all will also talk to your local elected officials, governor's office, all those kind of things, because we all work together, we'll get it there, but we're not there yet. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for giving that update, and thank you, Lisa, for the comments and suggestions. There's a number of comments in the chat, and I know that we'll work on getting those translated for our Spanish-speaking participant, perhaps maybe even after the meeting. So I'll just do a quick recap of those, and then we'll move on to our next agenda item. There's a lot of comments in the chat, adding support to the idea of getting creative and partnering with other organizations who may be able to provide food and snacks and that sort of thing. We have a request in the chat to provide a link to the statutory language. And then also uplifting in the chat that, you know, folks drive hours to get to these meetings. Inviting folks to come to community engagement and not providing food is a definite hindrance. And also have some ditto and co-signing the idea of co-hosting and funding community organizations. So thanks for all those comments in the chat as well.
Oh,
All right.
really fast on that one. You know, funding the community organizations, yeah. You know, but I also want to acknowledge that, you know, we do not even remotely give the community organizations hardly anything, right, as it is. You know, I also want to fully acknowledge that we're not giving them the right support that we need to. I also just want to be careful that what very limited money we are able to give the community organizations, you know, that's going towards the work. If I could figure out a way to give them money for food too, that didn't take away from the funding that they're using for their own resources, I would. But please keep giving us ideas. Certainly interested in it, but it really boils down to we need some new language that would allow us to do this.
Thanks, Heather. Maria, I see your. Are you able to?
Yeah. I think that the comment in the chat box doesn't refer to CARF providing money to community organizations. I think it goes more to partnering with other community organizations that are able to provide, water and snacks. They don't have to provide a big budget, but, something small to nourish the community members that are going to participate in of these events. I think that's where the comments were trying to go
Okay, got it.
to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you can provide us the statutory language so we can check it out, and you mentioned that we can reach out to the governor to see if we can change this. If you can maybe over an email provide us more insights here, because we definitely
I am
think,
happy
that this is
to
a
talk
barrier for
about it
community
with you all,
engagement.
but I can't put it in writing. But I am more than happy to have a conversation with you all, because CARB staff cannot be advocating for this, hence why we haven't drafted language. But what I can say is, if you all believe that this is important, you can send letters to the governor that says CARB should have authority in statute to provide funding to community members at meetings for food, childcare, transportation, and all the other great things. It doesn't have to be specific language, just a letter to the governor saying that we should be given statutory authority to be able to fund these things.
Great, thanks, Heather. And thanks, Maria, for clarifying those comments in the chat. So we've got a few minutes here to go over the topic of evaluation results and feedback. I know that we had planned a little bit more time for this, but also anticipated that maybe we would spend more time talking about this important topic. So I'm going to hand it over to Karina, and we'll just do kind of a quick overview of these next two slides, and then reserve 10 minutes for our wrap up and next steps.
Thanks, Julia. So I'll try to keep this really quick. So here are the results from the evaluation you all took at the end of your last community expert meeting. So we just wanted to allocate a little bit of time to see if you all still had questions. So for this question, for example, a little bit under a third of you indicated that you somewhat agreed with this statement, which was that you understood the purpose of creating the community engagement model. So we just wanted to ask you all if maybe you all still had questions on what the purpose was. And I'll kind of cluster this with the next slide, if we could go to that, which is, one slide back, please, which was about your role. So it seemed, again, a little bit close to 30% of you maybe weren't too clear on what your role was. So if you had any questions on those, maybe they were somewhat answered after, doing 3 tasks now as part of your contract and reading the model in its entirety. Maybe they've been answered, but happy to take any questions through the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we could take those right now.
Okay, thanks, Karina.
And if not, I could keep moving. I have one more slide.
Keep moving.
All right, so we're on the feedback slide. So essentially, we wanted to talk a little bit about feedback, since that's something that came up during our last meeting. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the various ways that we're collecting feedback on the model. So the first one really being from you all. So we're collecting your feedback verbally as well as written through the feedback that you've given your contract managers. And then we'll also be hosting those community dialogue sessions, both online and in person. So we'll be collecting feedback through there. And on our community engagement model website, we have a public comment docket. So anyone from the public can submit their comments there. And what's really cool about this is that you can actually see other people's comments as well. And lastly, we also have a phone number that the public can call if they would prefer to leave their comments verbally. And so that's also an option there. And then of course our community engagement model email. And we also wanted to talk about, what are we doing with all of this feedback? And so we're compiling it all into one spreadsheet. So depending, on the different formats that we got it, we're still going to put it in this one place so that it's easier for us to process it. And so we'll go through each individual comment that we receive and address it. And then we will provide you all as community experts, as well as the public, with a detailed summary of the questions and comments that we receive. And then we'll also provide responses as summaries, since we do anticipate that we'll be getting quite a few of those over these next few months. And, if there's any feedback that doesn't end up going into the model, that will still be addressed. We'll provide a response as to why it was not. And all of the summary responses that we will develop will be made public once we finish developing this model with you all over these next few months. And then I see your hand raised. Anitha, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just commenting on the previous one on the, what are we doing? And one of the comments that came out of the breakout, well, it was my comment in the breakout group. It takes quite a while for me to figure out how to lower my hand, is that in the model, we should say, well, CARB should say what it is not as much as saying what it is, because it was not really clear if you should use it. Like, one of the CARB staff was in our room and told us that it was intended for use in regulatory comment periods. And then, we decided that, some of the experts clarified that it wasn't for emergency response events, like if you have a natural gas release or some of those other type of events that we've had. So yes, you're quite correct. You get a much better sense after reviewing the model, but it would also be helpful to say what the model is not for, which situations it is not intended for. So thanks. It just took a while for me to get my hand up.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you. I think that's really important, just as much as it is, what the purpose is, what is it also not for? So clarifying, that would be great to include. So I noted that.
Great, thank you, Karina. Is there any other comments or questions about this? Feel free to put those in the chat. Next slide, please. All right, so first of all, thank you everybody for a really productive meeting. We had a really packed agenda, and you all really provided some great feedback and a lot of suggestions and comments for us to go through. So thank you. We're also putting in the chat a link to an evaluation to help us improve our time together for our next meeting. So you'll see that link in the chat now. Thanks, Deidre. Please click on that link and fill it out so that we know how we can best improve these meetings going forward. And then a quick reminder to please submit your comments on the community engagement model by November 17th to your contract managers, and that is this Friday. So this Friday, submitting comments on the community engagement model to your contract managers. And then I also want to be mindful of folks' time. If you have to leave right at 8, please feel free to do so. But for those of you who would like to continue a discussion or had any remaining follow-up questions, we on the topics that we discussed today, you can remain on the line, and CARB staff and myself are going to stick around for another 10 to 15 minutes. So thank you all very much, and we'll be here, and I'm just gonna leave that link in the chat there for you guys for the meeting evaluation form. And then if there are any other questions or comments, please feel free to let us know. I see a question from Vanessa in the chat, submitting additional comments to the model since our submissions on November 10th. Are these additional?
So I can speak a little bit to that. So the new kind of deadline that we have set is for November 17th. But if you need any more time, you can contact your contract manager to figure out a time that works for you if you need more time.
Thanks, Karina. Got a comment in the chat from Jasmine. Bakersfield College is a great location.
Real quick, do you guys have a punch list for these meetings that are coming up?
Yeah, can you clarify what you mean by a punch list?
What information are you going to provide people? Are you going to have information boards? Are you going to have handouts? Are you going to stand in front of everybody and tell them what you need? Are you going to do schematics of the room? What sort of equipment needs are you going to have? Are you going to have at least 3 sawhorses with blinking lights? Because you're really going to need them. Let's see, what else? And what is your pre-room check and what is your post-room check and close up of the room?
Yeah, and we see comment from Jasmine, also microphones, tech, AV. Yeah, I see Deidre off mute there.
Yeah, so I'll take a first jump at it, but please, other folks from the work group, feel free to jump in. I'm not sure I can remember all of the questions, Lisa, but I think I've got them. So we will have mics and speaker systems. We'll have some form of a projector system. If those aren't in the locations that we're going to, we're bringing those with us. We're also having at least Spanish interpreters, and if we've heard from communities that other languages are needed, we'll do that. We've ensured that all the locations are ADA accessible. All of the rooms have movable tables and chairs, so we're not asking people to stand for 2 hours. We'll make sure that chairs, don't have arms, so if people need different sort of chair accommodations, that's taken care of. We hear you all on the signs. It was maybe not something we thought of, but we hear you all loud and clear. There needs to be lots of bright signage in multiple places, so we will take care of that.
Literally, you need sawhorses with blinking lights. I kid you not. You need the sawhorses.
I believe you. I grew up in the country. I know, but it's dark. It gets real dark real quick and foggy. Yep, so we'll have that. We'll make sure the room is welcoming. We've picked rooms where we can sit at tables, so it's not someone lecturing people. We're trying to keep the kind of us talking to a minimum. And we will also have surveys at the end of it, very short. So we heard you all too on the too many surveys, too many questions. We'll keep the surveys short. We'll have those in multiple languages, online and in paper. And we will follow up with people in terms of, here's where you can go for more information, and we'll send follow-up emails of, this is all we heard, this is where the model's at, here's where we're going next. So I'm not sure that got all of your questions, Lisa, but we have been thinking about this, but we're always open for more feedback and things we should be considering or planning for.
Yeah, if you want to run your punch list by me, I'm more than open.
Yeah,
I don't make pie this week, so I'm more than open. I have so much free time.
Awesome. We love it. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
All righty. Well, I want you to have a very successful Fresno meeting.
Us too. Thank you.
All righty. You guys have a good evening.
Thanks, Lisa. You too.
Thank
Good
you.
night. All right, we got a minute left.
Bye and good night, you guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining. It's good to see everyone.
I'm going to put the link to the evaluation form in the chat one more time, just so it's right there at the bottom, just in case any of you are looking through the comments or things like that, need the link again. Thank you, Violetta.
I had a question because the location of the meeting, the in-person meeting is for the Valley, since they're all in the South. So since the folks that are here in the San Joaquin Valley are more than likely not going to attend in person because it's like a couple 100 miles away, the closest meeting. So then I can definitely, in terms of having them give input, it'll be via Zoom then, and then which one in terms of like for myself to attend, because everything is pretty much the same, you know, as far as distance is concerned. I think the closest would be Fresno. And for me, I mean, the fog's not an issue, but it's going to be really hard for me to get community members to any of those locations. It's just, it's too much to ask for that many miles because round trip. That's why I put that in there, just so that it's on point and clear that it's not that they wouldn't want to participate. It's that there's not going to be anything on this end of the valley. And so both are on the south end. So it's going to be either 300 or, you know, over almost 500 miles. So it depends on which way they're going as a round trip.
Yeah, and other folks, please feel free to join in. We hear you. We do not expect you to drive 300 or 500 miles. Please, like, that's not expected of you. And so I'm not, one of the ways that you said this was it sounded like we are expecting you to be at the meetings, and we don't. So if you're worried about that, that's not part of the contract. You're not required. We would love to have you online or in person, but you're not required to drive 500 miles to get to a meeting whatsoever. You know, and so if the only option that works for you is the online, we can talk about, can we set up like a, you know, a watch party at a location with you where we're kind of working in one spot? Is there ways we can get creative about making sure you and the folks that you would want to have included can join? But please don't, we're not asking you to drive 500 miles.
Okay. So then in terms of that, like I was thinking something along the lines, either the Bakersfield or the Fresno one, because then if it's going to be more like Valley centric, then I could do that, like in terms of like a watch party or something, because the other one, the Sacramento one, right, is Yuba City. And that's far. Correct. Is there one in Sacramento, or is it the Yuba City is Sacramento Valley?
It's Yuba City. Yeah. Yeah. When y'all voted and you picked Yuba City, we were like, okay, we're going to Yuba City.
Oh my God. I know, I looked at that and I was trying to figure that one out because I was like, okay, well, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be like regional specific. So then the region is going to be different as far as concerns. And so then I was trying to figure out, oh, okay, maybe I could stay with a friend out there, and their place is like an hour away. Maria's like, yeah, Oakland would be closer to me, and then I could take the train because I do want to go to one, but I'm just like, I was thinking that if it's regional specific, then I would need to go to a Valley one.
No, and I mean, we're calling them sort of regional meetings, just because we're, you know, trying to grab that kind of wider region. You know, for in Oakland, we're trying to grab that kind of Bay Area region. And I think that when people are talking to us, obviously things that are local for them are going to be what gets brought up, but we're not going to be like tailoring things to the places that we're going. You know, we're asking pretty broad questions of like, what makes you feel heard? How can we partner with you better? How can we better, you know, have a better relationship? So, you know, we're not going in and being like, well, we understand the specific context in Oakland and let's just talk about that, or just talk about the Bay Area. So yeah, I think to that broader point, you know, if other in-person meetings work better for you, that would be great to have you. If the online one ends up being the option, that's great too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to look in terms of schedule wise, like if it's Oakland, or I mean, even if it's Fresno, if I can couple that up with something else work wise over there, you know, then for me, it's not a problem. And then I'll check in with our community members that are part of the coalition to see what works for them schedule wise to have like that kind of watch party input and do it that way. And then I'll follow up with my manager, with Jose Wright, to let him know.
Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah. And just to reiterate, you're not required to be there. We'd love to have you all there, but
yeah,
we recognize that, you know,
okay.
it's not what
Yeah.
you need to do.
And then I could follow up too with the comments that I had in there as far as like the organization agencies in terms of that co-hosting, because we're doing something with them because they have those funds they have to get out for that low income water program, and they're statewide, right? So they're all over, and they have funds available. So then that would make, it easy for them to be there. And then that's like a resource for the community members. And then they could, because they're there, maybe provide like the food part of it. So, I could put you in communication with our manager here in Stockton, and she oversees like various regions in Northern California. So that would answer the question for some of the other meetings as well.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd really appreciate that.
Okay, yeah, I could definitely follow up. I'll talk to her and then follow up. So with Heather, or who should I follow up with on that?
Remind me who your contract manager is.
It's
it
me.
Jose?
You can follow up with me, Espen. Well,
okay. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, thank you. Sorry for like all of that.